The sun shone brightly over Millfield that Saturday morning, the kind of perfect spring day that brought everyone out to the weekly farmers market downtown. The air smelled of fresh bread and flowers, with children laughing as they ran between stalls selling honey and handmade soaps. For most of the town's 20,000 people, it was just another beautiful weekend. They didn't know they were about to witness something that would change their community forever. Parking spots near the market were always hard to find. The small lot beside the courthouse filled up early, and latecomers had to walk several blocks. This morning, a sleek white Mercedes circled the lot twice, its driver becoming more frustrated with each pass. Inside the car, Eleanor Harrington tapped her manicured nails against the steering wheel. At 52, she maintained the polished appearance expected of someone in her position. Her clothes were expensive but not flashy, her blonde hair perfectly styled. As the wife of Mayor Richard Harrington, she'd grown used to things going her way in Millfield. When Eleanor spotted a car backing out, she quickly moved toward the empty space, only to watch a modest blue Honda slide into it from the other direction. The Mercedes horn blared, long and angry. Dr. Maya Wilson stepped out of her Honda, initially confused by the honking. She'd moved to Millfield just 3 weeks ago to head the neurology department at Millfield General Hospital. At 36, she'd already made a name for herself in her field, publishing research that caught the attention of hospital boards across the country. When Millfield offered her the department chair, she saw it as a chance to build something meaningful in a smaller community. Maya hadn't noticed the Mercedes waiting for the spot. From her angle, it had looked like an open space in a crowded lot. She gathered her canvas shopping bags from the passenger seat, planning to pick up fresh produce for the week ahead. "Excuse me." Eleanor's voice cut through the pleasant market chatter as she parked in a loading zone and approached Maya. "That was my spot. I was waiting." Maya turned surprised. "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't see you waiting." Eleanor looked Maya up and down, taking in her simple jeans and button-up shirt. "Well, you took it anyway, didn't you?" Her voice had an edge that caught the attention of nearby shoppers. "It was an honest mistake," Maya said, her voice calm and professional, the same tone she used with difficult patients. "I'm new in town, still learning my way around." "New in town?" Eleanor repeated with a small, tight smile. "That explains it. In Millfield, we show respect to those who've built this community." A few people had stopped to watch now. Eleanor Harrington's face was well known in town. From charity galas to ribbon cuttings, she was often by the mayor's side in the local paper. "I meant no disrespect," Maya said, extending her hand. "I'm Dr. Maya Wilson. I recently joined Millfield General." Eleanor ignored the outstretched hand. "I don't care if you're a doctor or a dishwasher. You people need to learn how things work here." The words "you people" hung in the air. Maya's hand slowly lowered to her side. "What exactly do you mean by you people?" she asked quietly. By now a small crowd had gathered. Among them was Daphne Chen, who taught English at the local high school. She'd been filming the exchange on her phone since Eleanor's voice first raised. Something in the woman's tone had told her this might be important to document. "Don't play dumb with me," Eleanor said, stepping closer. "My husband runs this town. We've kept Millfield nice for decades. Then people like you move in and think the rules don't apply." Maya took a deep breath. In her career, she'd faced prejudice before. Subtle comments from patients who requested a different doctor, or colleagues who questioned her qualifications. But rarely had it been so blatant, so public. "Ma'am, this is about a parking space," Maya said, keeping her voice steady. "Nothing more. If it means that much to you, I'm happy to move my car." "It's too late for that," Eleanor said. "It's about respect, about understanding your place." An older man stepped forward from the crowd. Tom Washington had lived in Millfield for all his 70 years. He'd owned the hardware store downtown until retiring last year. "Now, Eleanor," he said gently, "this isn't necessary. It's just a parking spot." Eleanor turned on him. "Stay out of this, Tom. This doesn't concern you." "I think it concerns all of us," said a woman's voice. Layla Rodriguez, who owned the popular cafe across from the market, had joined Tom. "You're making a scene over nothing." Eleanor's face flushed red. "Nothing? This is exactly the problem. Standards in this town are slipping because nobody wants to say anything. Well, I'm not afraid to say it. Some people don't belong here." Maya stood perfectly still, her back straight. Years of training had taught her to remain composed in crisis. "I think," she said clearly, That what you're really saying has nothing to do with parking and everything to do with the color of my skin. The crowd grew silent. Eleanor's eyes narrowed. Playing the race card already? Typical. My husband appointed the first black department head in city government. I host the diversity luncheon every year. And yet, Maya said, here you are telling me to know my place. More phones had come out now. At least 5 people were recording. Eleanor seemed not to notice or care. My husband is running for his 4th term, she said, voice rising. We've given everything to this town. My family built Millfield while yours was, where exactly? Not here, that's for sure. Maya looked around at the watching faces, some uncomfortable, some angry, some simply shocked. She saw people she'd met at the hospital, patients she'd treated. For a moment she considered simply walking away. It would be easier. But then she thought of the younger doctors she mentored, the message her silence would send. My family has been in this country for 4 generations, she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. My grandfather fought in Vietnam. My mother was a teacher for 30 years. I worked my way through medical school and now I'm one of the top neurologists in the state. I came to Millfield because I believed in this community. I still want to believe in it. Eleanor laughed, a sharp, dismissive sound. A nice speech. Very professional. But this is the real world, honey. In the real world, there's a natural order to things. My husband controls the budget for your hospital, by the way. Something to think about. Gasps rippled through the crowd at the thinly veiled threat. Daphne Chen's hand shook slightly as she continued filming. But she didn't stop. Maya stepped closer to Eleanor. Her voice lower now, but still clear. Are you threatening my job because of a parking space? Or because I didn't show enough deference to the mayor's wife? Please clarify exactly what's happening here. Take it however you want, Eleanor snapped. Just remember who you're dealing with. Tom Washington moved to stand beside Maya. Then Layla Rodriguez joined them. A young man Maya recognized as an orderly from the hospital stepped up too. I think we all see exactly who she's dealing with, Tom said, his voice sad rather than angry. And it's not the Millfield I've loved my whole life. Eleanor looked around, suddenly seeming to realize how many people were watching and recording. For a brief moment, uncertainty flickered across her face. Then she straightened her designer jacket. You'll regret making an enemy of me, she said to Maya. All of you will. She turned and walked back to her illegally parked Mercedes. As Eleanor drove away, the crowd began to disperse, many approaching Maya with quiet words of support or apologetic looks. I'm sorry you experienced that, Daphne said, finally lowering her phone, especially as someone new to town. Does she usually behave that way? Maya asked. Tom and Layla exchanged glances. Eleanor has always been difficult, Tom said carefully, but this was something else. I have her on video, Daphne said. Every word. What will you do with it? Layla asked. Daphne looked at her phone, then at Maya. That depends, Dr. Wilson, what do you want to happen here? Maya looked around at these strangers who had stood beside her. Perhaps Millfield could be home after all. I just came for groceries, she said with a small smile. But it seems I found something else too. What none of them knew then was how quickly things would change. By sundown, Daphne's video would be spreading across social media. By morning, it would reach local news stations. And by Monday, the entire town of Millfield would be forced to confront truths many had spent years pretending not to see. But in that moment, standing in the sunshine among new allies, Maya simply picked up her shopping bags and continued into the market. She had a life to build in this town, regardless of Eleanor Harrington's opinion on the matter, and Millfield would never be quite the same again. By Sunday morning, Daphne Chen's video had traveled far beyond the farmer's market. What began as a post on her personal page had been shared over 2,000 times overnight. Local community groups buzzed with comments, and people who weren't even at the market now had strong opinions about what had happened. Daphne sat at her kitchen table, scrolling through the responses on her phone. She hadn't expected such an explosion. She'd simply posted the video with a straightforward caption. Mayor's wife Eleanor Harrington confronts new doctor over parking space at today's farmer's market. Listen to what she says, her phone rang. It was Layla from the cafe. Have you seen the news? Layla asked without saying hello. Channel 5 just ran a story about the video. Daphne nearly spilled her coffee. What, already? They're calling it parking lot prejudice. They showed clips from your video. They tried to get comments from the mayor's office, but no response yet. Across town in the Harrington household, things were considerably less calm. Mayor Richard Harrington paced the living room of their historic Victorian home, his cell phone pressed against his ear. At 57, with graying temples and the confident posture of someone used to authority, he usually handled crises with practiced ease. But this was different. This was personal. "No comment isn't working anymore, Pete," he said to his campaign manager. "The damn video is everywhere." Eleanor sat on the sofa, arms crossed, watching her husband with narrowed eyes. "It's being blown completely out of proportion," she said loudly enough for Pete to hear over the phone. "I was having a bad day and that woman was rude." Richard covered the phone with his hand. "The video doesn't show her being rude. Ellie, it shows you threatening her job and making comments about you people and knowing her place." "That's not what I meant and you know it," Eleanor snapped. Richard returned to his call. "Pete, we need a statement. Something that acknowledges the situation without making it worse." He paused, listening. "No, I don't think an apology from Eleanor." As Eleanor stood up, "I'm not apologizing for defending myself." "Realistic at this point," Richard finished, giving his wife a look that said they'd discuss it later. At the modest apartment she was renting until she found a permanent home, Maya Wilson sat on her couch with a cup of tea, trying to process everything that had happened. Her phone had been buzzing nonstop with messages from colleagues, friends, and even strangers who had found her contact information. A text came in from Dr. Howard Green, the hospital director who had recruited her to Millfield. "Maya, I've seen the video. Deeply disturbing. Please know the hospital stands with you. Eleanor Harrington has no influence over your position. Call me if you need anything." That was reassuring, at least. She'd worried about potential professional fallout. The mayor did hold significant influence over the hospital's funding, despite what Dr. Green might wish to believe. Another message arrived. This one from Layla Rodriguez, who had given Maya her number at the market. "Just checking in. This thing is blowing up. A bunch of us are meeting at my cafe after closing tonight to talk about it. Would you consider coming?" No pressure, Maya thought about it. Her first instinct was to stay quiet and let things blow over. She hadn't moved to Millfield looking for controversy. But something about hiding away felt wrong. She texted back, "What time?" By late afternoon, Mayor Harrington had released a brief statement. "My wife Eleanor had an unfortunate disagreement with a community member yesterday. She was frustrated about a parking situation, and her words were taken out of context. The Harrington family has always supported diversity in Millfield, and any suggestion otherwise is misleading. We ask for privacy as we address this family matter." The statement only fueled more outrage. Comments flooded the mayor's social media. "Taken out of context? We all heard what she said. What exactly is the proper context for you people need to learn your place? Asking for privacy after your wife publicly harassed someone? That's rich." At 6 o'clock, the local news ran an expanded story. The anchor, Vivian Taylor, appeared on screen with a serious expression. "Our top story tonight. Controversy surrounds Millfield's first family after a video went viral showing Eleanor Harrington, wife of Mayor Richard Harrington, in what many are calling a racially charged confrontation at yesterday's farmers market. The incident has sparked widespread discussion about race relations in our community. The screen showed clips from Daphne's video, with certain phrases highlighted. You people need to learn how things work here. People like you move in and think the rules don't apply. Understanding your place. My husband controls the budget for your hospital. By the way." The newscast cut to an interview with Tom Washington, the retired hardware store owner who had intervened. "I've known Eleanor for 30 years, he said, looking uncomfortable but determined. Never seen her quite like that. It wasn't just about a parking space. Anyone could see that." The reporter asked, "Would you describe her comments as racist?" Tom sighed heavily. "I'm an old man. I've seen this town change a lot over the decades, mostly for the better. But some attitudes, they stick around. What Eleanor said, the way she said it, yes, I'd call it racist. And it's time we started calling things what they are." At Layla's cafe after closing hours, chairs had been arranged in a circle. 15 people had shown up. Daphne and Tom were there, along with several hospital staff members, a couple of teachers from the high school. and others who had witnessed the incident or seen the video. When Maya walked in, the room fell briefly silent. "Thank you for coming," Layla said, approaching with a warm smile. "I wasn't sure you would." "I almost didn't," Maya admitted. A tall man with salt and pepper hair stood up. "Dr. Wilson, I'm Pastor David from First Community Church. I just want to say how sorry I am that this was your introduction to our town." Maya nodded in acknowledgement as she took a seat in the circle. "I think we should start by asking what we want to accomplish here," Daphne suggested. "The video's out there. The mayor has made his statement. What now?" "That non-apology was insulting," said a young nurse from the hospital. "They're hoping this will just blow over." "And will it?" Pastor David asked. "How many controversies have we seen come and go? People get angry, they post online, and then nothing changes." Tom Washington cleared his throat. "I've lived here my whole life. Millfield has always prided itself on being better than other places. We like to think we don't have the same problems. But that's just not true, is it?" An uncomfortable silence followed. "This isn't just about Eleanor Harrington," Layla said finally. Her words were just the most visible sign of something many of us have experienced in smaller ways. Several people nodded. "The police stopped my son 3 times in 2 weeks after he got his new car," said a middle-aged black woman Maya hadn't met. Each time they said he matched a description. Of what? A young black man driving a nice car? Others began sharing stories. The teacher whose students of color were consistently overlooked for advanced programs. The nurse who heard patients request someone else when they saw who was assigned to their care. The subtle ways housing remained segregated despite no official policies. Maya listened, taking it all in. This wasn't unique to Millfield. She'd seen it everywhere she'd lived. But there was something powerful about people naming it out loud together. "So what do we do?" Daphne asked again. "Beyond just talking? We have an opportunity," Pastor David said thoughtfully. "People are paying attention right now. Maybe we can channel that attention toward actual change." "Like what?" someone asked. "Like demanding the mayor do more than issue empty statements," Layla suggested. "Like asking for town meetings about these issues. Like looking at actual policies that could make a difference." "The mayor is up for re-election in 6 months," Tom reminded them. "That gives us some leverage." Throughout the discussion, Maya had remained mostly quiet. Now all eyes turned to her. "Dr. Wilson," Pastor David said gently, "you're at the center of this, though you didn't ask to be. What do you think?" Maya took a deep breath. "I came to Millfield because I was impressed by the hospital, and I liked the idea of building something in a smaller community. I didn't come looking for this fight." People nodded understandingly. "But," she continued, "I also can't pretend this didn't happen. Not just for my sake, but for everyone who's experienced what I did, whether there was a camera recording or not." She looked around the circle at these people who were still strangers yet had shown up tonight. "I think Mayor Harrington needs to meet with us. Not just me, but all of us. Not for a photo op or a quick apology, but for a real conversation about what kind of town Millfield actually is. And what kind it could be." The energy in the room shifted. Heads nodded more vigorously. People sat up straighter. "That's exactly right," Tom said. "And he needs to hear these stories directly." "Will he agree to that?" Maya asked. Daphne held up her phone. "The video has over 50,000 views now. People from neighboring towns are sharing it. Local news has picked it up. His statement is being torn apart online. I think he'll agree to just about anything to make this go away." "Then we don't let it just go away," Layla said firmly. "We make sure something real comes from it." As the meeting continued, plans taking shape, Maya found herself thinking about how differently this day had turned out than she'd expected. 24 hours ago, she'd been a new doctor in town, focused on settling in and starting her job. Now she was at the center of a community movement. It wasn't what she'd signed up for. But looking around at the determined faces in the room, she realized it might be exactly where she needed to be. Outside Layla's cafe, unnoticed by those inside, a car drove slowly past. In the passenger seat, Eleanor Harrington watched the gathering through the window, her face unreadable in the darkness. By Monday morning, the story had grown beyond Millfield's borders. Regional news outlets picked it up, and social media users from neighboring states shared their outrage. What began as a parking dispute was now being discussed as a symbol of the everyday racism that often went unchallenged in small-town America. Mayor Richard Harrington arrived at his office earlier than usual, the bags under his eyes betraying his sleepless night. His assistant, Vicky, greeted him with a stack of message slips. "These all came in before 8, she said. "The phone hasn't stopped ringing." Richard flipped through them, 3 local reporters, 2 regional newspapers, a national cable news channel, and 6 town council members wanting emergency meetings. "And these emails need immediate attention," Vicky added, handing him a printed list. "The NACP has released a statement calling for a formal apology and community action plan. The hospital board is distancing themselves from your statement, and Councilwoman Patricia Taylor is suggesting you take a leave of absence until this is resolved." Richard sank into his chair. "A leave of absence? That's ridiculous. This will blow over in a few days." Vicky hesitated, then placed a tablet in front of him. "This is trending nationally now, sir. Over 200,000 views. People are calling for resignations." The mayor stared at the screen, watching his wife's angry face as she told Dr. Wilson to understand her place. Seeing it from this perspective, removed from the heat of the moment, he felt a cold knot form in his stomach. This was bad, worse than he'd initially realized. "Get Pete over here right away," he said, referring to his campaign manager, "and clear my schedule." Across town at Millfield General Hospital, Maya Wilson began her first official day as head of neurology. She'd considered calling in sick to avoid the attention, but decided that hiding would only make things more awkward later. As she walked through the hospital entrance, conversations paused. Eyes followed her. Some people quickly looked away while others offered small smiles of support. Dr. Howard Green, the hospital director, was waiting by the elevator. "Dr. Wilson," he said warmly, extending his hand, "let's talk in my office." Once they were seated with the door closed, his expression turned serious. "I want to personally apologize for what happened. That's not what Millfield is about." Maya gave him a measured look. "Isn't it, though? At least partly?" Dr. Green sighed. "Perhaps you're right, but it's not what we aspire to be." He leaned forward. "The hospital board met last night. We're issuing a statement supporting you and making it clear that Eleanor Harrington's threats about hospital funding were completely inappropriate and do not reflect our relationship with the mayor's office." "I appreciate that," Maya said. "There's more," Dr. Green continued. "We're accelerating the launch of our community health initiative, focusing on addressing healthcare disparities in underserved neighborhoods. We'd like you to head it if you're willing." Maya raised an eyebrow. "Is this because of what happened?" "The timing, yes," he admitted. "But the need has always been there. Sometimes it takes a moment like this to push institutions to act on what they already know is right." Meanwhile, at Millfield High School, Daphne Chen faced her own kind of spotlight. Her first-period English students had clearly all seen the video, and they were bursting with questions. "Did you know it would go viral?" asked one. "Are you going to be on TV?" asked another. Daphne held up her hands. "I know you all want to talk about this, and it is important, but we still have coursework to cover." A girl in the back row raised her hand. "Ms. Chen, isn't this exactly what we've been studying? Real-world rhetoric and civic discourse?" Daphne paused. The student had a point. "All right," she said, putting down her lesson plan. "Let's talk about it, but as a case study in communication. What rhetorical strategies did Eleanor Harrington use? What about Dr. Wilson? How did the bystanders change the dynamic?" The classroom came alive with a discussion more passionate than any they'd had all year. By mid-afternoon, the mayor's office announced that Richard Harrington would hold a press conference at 5 o'clock. The rumor mill immediately went into overdrive. Was he resigning? Firing his campaign staff? Divorcing Eleanor? At the Harrington home, Eleanor paced in the kitchen while Richard's campaign team prepped him in the living room. "This is absurd," she fumed to her friend Diane on the phone. "Richard is throwing me under the bus to save his political career." "What exactly happened, Ellie?" Diane asked cautiously. "The video looks pretty bad." "The video?" Eleanor spat. 15 seconds of me at my worst moment and suddenly I'm the villain of Millfield. 20 years of charity work, fundraising for the hospital, running the Christmas toy drive. All erased because of one parking spot. It wasn't just about the parking spot though, was it? Diane said quietly. The question hung in the air. Eleanor's grip tightened on her phone. "You too?" she finally said. "I thought you were my friend." "I am your friend," Diane replied. "That's why I'm asking the question nobody else will. What were you really angry about, Ellie?" At Layla's cafe, the group that had met the previous night reconvened, joined by several more community members who had heard about their efforts. They gathered around a television Layla had brought in specially for the mayor's press conference. "What do you think he'll say?" Tom Washington asked Maya, who sat next to him. "Best case, a genuine apology and concrete actions. Worst case, more excuses and deflection. And what are you hoping for?" Tom asked. Maya considered the question. "I'm hoping for something I didn't expect. Something that shows this really might be a turning point, not just a momentary embarrassment they want to cover up." The cafe fell silent as the local news showed Mayor Harrington approaching a podium set up outside City Hall. He looked tired but composed, his navy suit perfectly pressed as always. "Good afternoon," he began. "I want to address the incident that occurred at our farmers market on Saturday, involving my wife Eleanor and Dr. Maya Wilson, who recently joined the excellent team at Millfield General Hospital." He paused, adjusting his papers. My initial statement suggested that my wife's words were taken out of context. After reviewing the video multiple times and having many difficult conversations, I need to correct that characterization. There is no context that makes what was said acceptable. A murmur ran through the reporters gathered. Eleanor spoke words that were hurtful, discriminatory, and threatening. They do not reflect the values that Millfield aspires to uphold. For that, I offer Dr. Wilson and our entire community my deepest apology. In the cafe, people exchanged surprised glances. This was already more than they had expected. "However," the mayor continued, "I believe apologies without action are meaningless. Words without change are empty. And leadership that doesn't acknowledge failure isn't leadership at all." He removed his prepared remarks from the podium and set them aside. "I've been mayor of Millfield for 12 years. In that time, we've focused on economic growth, infrastructure, and maintaining our reputation as one of the best small towns in the state. But I now see that we've allowed ourselves to believe a comforting story about our community that isn't completely true." His voice grew more personal, less rehearsed. "The incident between my wife and Dr. Wilson didn't create divisions in Millfield, it revealed them. And for too long, those of us in positions of power and privilege have had the luxury of looking away." At the Harrington home, Eleanor watched the press conference on television, her face pale. This wasn't the statement they had discussed. Richard was going off script. "Therefore," the mayor continued, "I'm announcing 3 immediate actions. First, I've accepted Councilwoman Taylor's suggestion that I take a short leave of absence, not to avoid responsibility, but to commit myself fully to a series of community listening sessions where those who have felt marginalized in our town can speak directly to their experiences." He took a breath. "Second, I'm establishing a diversity and community inclusion task force with real authority to review town policies and recommend changes. I've asked Dr. Maya Wilson if she would consider co-chairing this task force alongside Pastor David Lee from First Community Church." In the cafe, all eyes turned to Maya in surprise. "He called you?" Layla asked. "About an hour ago," Maya confirmed. "I said I'd consider it depending on what happened at this press conference." "And third," the mayor was saying, "I want to address the personal aspect of this situation. My wife Eleanor made a serious mistake. Her words caused real harm. But I've known her for 30 years and I know her heart. She is not defined solely by her worst moment, just as Millfield is not defined solely by its failures." His voice cracked slightly. "Eleanor has agreed to step back from her public role and engage in a process of listening, learning, and making amends. This starts with a private meeting with Dr. Wilson, should she be willing." The press erupted with questions, but Richard held up his hand. "One last thing. I've been asked if this incident will affect my re-election campaign. The answer is yes, but not in the way you might think. If the people of Millfield still want me as their mayor after my term ends, I will run on a platform that explicitly prioritizes equity and inclusion alongside our other goals. If that cost me votes, so be it. Because a town that truly values all its citizens is more important than any political career." As the cafe erupted in conversation, Maya sat quietly, processing what she'd just heard. It was better than she'd expected, much better. But words were still just words. The real test would come in the days and weeks ahead. Her phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Green. "He called me too. The task force is real. Hospital will give you protected time to serve if you want it. Another text came in, this one from an unknown number. Dr. Wilson, this is Richard Harrington. I meant what I said. The choice to participate is entirely yours with no pressure or expectation. Either way, my apology stands. Tom Washington leaned over. So, what do you think? Is this the turning point you were hoping for? Maya looked around at the diverse faces in the cafe. People who had been strangers 3 days ago and were now united in a cause. It could be, she said carefully, if we make it one. Outside City Hall, as reporters continued shouting questions, Mayor Harrington stepped away from the podium feeling both exhausted and somehow lighter. For the first time in years, he had spoken without calculating every word for political advantage. Whether it saved his career or ended it, he had finally said what needed to be said. The real work was just beginning. 2 weeks after the mayor's press conference, Maya Wilson sat in a private room at Layla's cafe, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea. She had arrived early to collect her thoughts before the meeting. Through the window, she could see television vans parked across the street, reporters hoping to catch a glimpse of what many were calling the reconciliation. The bell over the cafe door jingled. Eleanor Harrington entered alone. She wore a simple gray dress rather than her usual designer outfits, her blonde hair pulled back in a plain style. Without her usual makeup, she looked older, more vulnerable. Layla nodded toward the private room and Eleanor walked over, her steps hesitant. When she opened the door, Maya stood. For a moment, the two women simply looked at each other. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," Eleanor finally said, her voice quieter than Maya remembered. "Please sit down," Maya replied, gesturing to the chair across from her. Eleanor sat, placing her purse carefully on the floor beside her. I brought something for you." She reached into her purse and pulled out a small box. "It's not a bribe or anything like that. Just something I thought you should have." Maya opened the box. Inside was an old key, tarnished with age. "That's the key to the old West Side Medical Clinic," Eleanor explained. "It belonged to my father. He was a doctor there for 40 years. Maya looked up, confused. "The West Side Clinic?" "I thought that closed down decades ago." "It did," Eleanor nodded. "After integration forced them to accept black patients." She looked down at her hands. "My father quit rather than treat them. He always said it was about standards, but—" Her voice trailed off. "Why are you telling me this?" Maya asked. Eleanor met her eyes. "Because I never told anyone. Not even Richard. I kept it hidden like so many things in this town. But that key has been in my jewelry box for 30 years, reminding me of a legacy I never confronted." The silence between them felt heavy with history. "My father was wrong," Eleanor continued. "And that day at the market I sounded just like him. Same words, same tone, same hatred." She spoke the last word as if it tasted bitter. "I didn't even hear myself until I watched that video." Maya studied the woman across from her. This wasn't what she had expected. She had prepared for excuses, for a politically motivated apology, for defensiveness, not for this raw honesty. "The key is yours now," Eleanor said. "Maybe it means nothing to you. Maybe you'll throw it away. But I thought you should have the choice." Outside the private room, the cafe had filled with regular customers, all pretending they weren't curious about the meeting taking place behind the closed door. Layla kept them supplied with coffee and pastries, deflecting questions with practiced ease. "Do you think they're actually talking?" Daphne Chen asked, sitting at the counter. "They've been in there for 20 minutes without any shouting," Layla replied. "That's something." The bell jingled again as Mayor Richard Harrington entered, followed by Pastor David Lee. They had just come from the first official meeting of the Diversity and Community Inclusion Task Force. Unlike the reporters outside, they weren't there to observe the meeting between Eleanor and Maya. They had their own work to discuss. "How's it going in there?" Richard asked Layla quietly. "Still talking," she said. "Coffee?" "Please." Both men answered simultaneously. Inside the private room, the conversation had moved beyond personal history to the present. "The task force had its first meeting today," Maya said. "There's real interest in making changes. Not just superficial things, but addressing housing policies, police training, school resources." Eleanor nodded. "Richard told me. He's different since all this happened. More like the man I married, actually." She hesitated. "May I ask why you agreed to meet with me?" "You had every right to refuse." Maya considered the question. Partly curiosity, partly because I believe people can change, even when it's difficult, and partly because moving forward requires understanding how we got here. Do you think Millfield can change? Eleanor asked. Some things already have, Maya pointed out. 2 weeks ago, most people in town could pretend there wasn't a problem. That option is gone now. Eleanor looked down at her untouched tea. I've lost friends over this. People I've known for decades. They say I've betrayed them by admitting I was wrong. And have you? Betrayed them? No, Eleanor said firmly. I've betrayed myself by being silent for so long, by going along with things I knew weren't right because it was easier. A knock at the door interrupted them. Layla peeked in. Sorry to disturb you, but there's something you both should see. She turned up the volume on the small television behind the counter. The local news was showing footage of the hospital parking lot, where at least 100 people had gathered, holding signs and chanting. The reporter's voice explained. This demonstration was organized by community members in support of the new healthcare outreach program, announced by Millfield General Hospital. The initiative, which will bring mobile medical services to underserved neighborhoods, is being co-led by Dr. Maya Wilson, the neurologist at the center of the recent controversy involving the mayor's wife. The camera panned across the crowd. Tom Washington was there, holding a sign that read, "Healthcare is a right, not a privilege." Beside him stood several nurses and doctors in scrubs, community members of all ages, and, most surprisingly, a group of high school students led by Daphne Chen. The students organized themselves, Daphne explained to the reporter. They've been studying civic engagement and they wanted to put it into practice. The news switched to an interview with Dr. Howard Green. This program has been in development for some time, but recent events highlighted the urgency of addressing healthcare disparities in our community. We're grateful to Dr. Wilson for her leadership, and to the mayor's office for their support. Eleanor watched the screen, her expression unreadable. They're out there because of what happened between us, she said quietly to Maya. Yes and no, Maya replied. What happened between us was a spark, but the kindling was already there, waiting for something to set it alight. The cafe door opened again and a young black woman in hospital scrubs entered. She spotted Maya through the doorway of the private room and waved. That's Zoe, Maya explained to Eleanor, one of our neurology residents. She's brilliant, turned down positions at major research hospitals to work here because she grew up in Millfield. Eleanor looked surprised. She grew up here? I don't think I've ever met her. That's part of the problem, Maya said gently. Millfield has always had two separate communities living side by side, barely interacting. The task force is trying to change that. Zoe approached their table. Dr. Wilson, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's been a change in the mobile clinic schedule. The equipment is arriving next week instead of next month. We need to adjust our staffing plan. That's great news, Maya said. Zoe, this is Eleanor Harrington. Zoe's expression cooled slightly, but she remained professional. Mrs. Harrington? Eleanor hesitated, then said, Dr. Green mentioned you're handling the pediatric outreach. My sister's a teacher at Westside Elementary. She might be able to help coordinate with the school. Zoe looked surprised. That would actually be very helpful. We've been having trouble getting in touch with the right people there. I can introduce you, Eleanor offered, if that would be appropriate. The awkward moment was broken by another commotion outside. Through the window, they could see more people joining the gathering at the hospital. Their numbers now spilling into the street. Mayor Harrington and Pastor David approached the private room. I think we should go address them, the mayor said to Maya. Show a united front for the new initiative. Maya glanced at Eleanor, who nodded. You should go. This is important. What about you? Maya asked. Eleanor shook her head. This isn't my moment. I've had enough attention. Actually, Pastor David interjected, having you there might send a powerful message, not as the focus, but as someone who supports the change. Only if you're comfortable with it, of course. Eleanor looked uncertain. Would that help or hurt? I don't want to make this about me. It's not about any one person, Maya said. It's about showing that Millfield is changing. All of Millfield. 20 minutes later, they stood on the steps of Millfield General Hospital. Dr. Green spoke first, outlining the new mobile health initiative. Then Mayor Harrington explained how the town would support the program through infrastructure and funding. When it was Maya's turn, she kept her remarks brief. Healthcare is a right that belongs to everyone, regardless of where they live, what they look like, or how much money they have. This program is just a first step toward making that right a reality in Millfield. The crowd applauded enthusiastically. Pastor David stepped forward. Change doesn't happen overnight. It requires honesty, courage, and the willingness to be uncomfortable. I've been in Millfield for 15 years, and I've never seen our community more ready to do that difficult work. He gestured to where Eleanor stood at the edge of the group. Mrs. Harrington has asked to say a few words. A murmur ran through the crowd as Eleanor approached the microphone. Some people crossed their arms skeptically. Others looked curious. She took a deep breath. I'm not here to make excuses for my behavior. What I said and did was wrong, period. But I am here to make a commitment. I've lived in Millfield my entire life believing I knew this town. I didn't, not really. I'm learning now, and it's not easy. It's painful to confront your own prejudices and the harm they've caused. She looked directly at the crowd. I can't undo what I did, but I can help build something better going forward. For those willing to give me that chance, thank you. For those who aren't there yet, I understand. I have work to do to earn your trust. As Eleanor stepped back, an unexpected thing happened. Zoe, the young resident, moved forward and briefly touched her arm. Not quite a handshake, but an acknowledgement. A small gesture, almost private, but caught by the news cameras. Later, that image, the young black doctor and the mayor's wife in a moment of tentative connection, would appear on the front page of the local paper. The headline read, "Millfield begins healing process." It wasn't a fairy tale ending. There were still arguments at task force meetings, resistance from those who preferred the status quo, and moments when progress seemed to stall. But something fundamental had shifted in Millfield. Conversations that had once happened in whispers now took place in public forums. People who had never interacted now worked side by side on community projects, and it had all started with a parking space and a cell phone video that forced a town to see itself clearly for the first time in decades. 6 months had passed since that Saturday morning at the farmers market. Millfield was entering fall, the trees along Main Street turning brilliant shades of orange and red. The town looked the same on the surface. Historic buildings, neat sidewalks, proud American flags outside the courthouse. But beneath the familiar appearance, much had changed. At the community center on the west side of town, a crowd gathered for the ribbon-cutting ceremony of the new satellite medical clinic. Dr. Maya Wilson stood beside Mayor Richard Harrington, both holding oversized ceremonial scissors. This clinic represents more than just healthcare, Maya told the audience. It represents what can happen when a community decides to face its challenges honestly and work together toward solutions. She glanced at the crowd, spotting familiar faces, Layla from the cafe, Tom Washington leaning on his cane, Daphne Chen with some of her students, Pastor David and members of his congregation. Even Zoe, despite her busy schedule as a resident, had come to witness this moment. 6 months ago, I was new to Millfield, Maya continued. Today I feel like I'm home. Not because everything is perfect, it isn't, but because when problems arise, I've seen this community's willingness to address them rather than look away. The mayor stepped forward. This clinic is just one of several initiatives born from the work of our Diversity and Community Inclusion Task Force. We've also implemented new training for our police department, revised housing policies to address historical inequities, and created a small business support program focused on underrepresented entrepreneurs. He paused, looking slightly uncomfortable. I need to acknowledge something. None of this would have happened without that difficult moment at the farmers market that forced us all to confront uncomfortable truths. Sometimes progress comes from our most painful experiences. After the ribbon was cut and the applause died down, people mingled in the new waiting room, admiring the bright artwork from local artists and the children's play area stocked with books and toys. Maya found herself standing next to Eleanor Harrington, who had arrived quietly during the ceremony and stayed in the back. Eleanor looked different these days, less rigid, her clothing simpler, her manner more approachable. It's wonderful, Eleanor said, gesturing to the clinic. You must be proud. Many people made this happen, Maya replied. Including you. Eleanor raised an eyebrow. Me? I was the problem, not the solution. You could have fought this every step of the way, Maya pointed out. Instead, you supported it. That fundraiser you organized paid for all the pediatric equipment. It was true. 3 months after their cafe meeting, Eleanor had hosted a gala that raised over $50,000 for the clinic. She'd invited people from both sides of town, many of whom had never socialized together before. It had been awkward at times, but important connections were made that night. Speaking of the fundraiser, Eleanor said, "Have you spoken with Councilwoman Taylor lately?" Maya smiled. "She called yesterday. She's officially announcing her candidacy for mayor next week." Richard had decided not to run for re-election, choosing instead to focus on implementing the task force recommendations during his remaining time in office. Several people had expressed interest in running, including Patricia Taylor, a longtime councilwoman who had been an early supporter of the community changes. "She asked me to be her campaign manager," Eleanor said, sounding surprised even as she said it. "Are you going to do it?" Eleanor nodded. "I think so. It feels right. Supporting the first black woman mayor of Millfield. Richard thinks it's a great idea." Across the room, Dr. Howard Green was showing Layla and Tom the new examination rooms. "State-of-the-art equipment," he explained proudly. "Exactly the same as what we have at the main hospital. No second-class care here." "How many patients do you expect to serve?" Layla asked. "Initially about 500 a month, but we have capacity to double that as word spreads. The mobile unit will reach even more in the rural areas outside town." Tom Washington nodded approvingly. "I never thought I'd see this in my lifetime. My mother used to clean houses on the east side of town to pay for my asthma treatments. There was nothing like this for families like ours." Outside in the parking lot, Daphne Chen was speaking with a reporter from the regional newspaper. "It's become a case study in community transformation," she explained. "My students have been documenting the changes, interviewing residents about their experiences. They're learning that history doesn't just happen in the past. They're watching it unfold in real time." "And what about the video that started it all?" the reporter asked. "Do you regret posting it?" Daphne considered the question. "Not posting it, no. But I do sometimes wonder about our culture of public shaming. Eleanor Harrington said and did something terrible that day. She deserved consequences. But she also deserved the chance to learn and change, which thankfully she took." The reporter nodded. "Not everyone would have." "Exactly," Daphne agreed. "The video was necessary to expose the truth. But what came after? The hard conversations, the policy changes, the relationships built. That's what really matters. That's what you can't capture in a viral moment." As the celebration continued, Maya slipped away to her office in the back of the clinic. She needed a moment alone to process everything. On her desk sat a framed photo from the hospital fundraiser, a group shot of the task force members, including both Harringtons, Pastor David, Layla, and others who had become not just colleagues but friends. Beside it was the tarnished key Eleanor had given her, the key to the old segregated clinic. Maya had kept it as a reminder of how the past shapes the present for better or worse. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. It was Zoe, the resident who had grown up in Millfield. "Got a minute?" she asked. "There's someone I'd like you to meet." Zoe led her to the waiting room where an elderly black woman sat in a wheelchair. Her hands were gnarled with arthritis, but her eyes were sharp and alert. "This is my grandmother, Mrs. Vivian Porter," Zoe said proudly. "Grandma, this is Dr. Wilson, the one I told you about." The older woman looked Maya up and down, then smiled. "My granddaughter speaks highly of you. Says you're shaking things up around here." "I'm just one of many," Maya said, taking the woman's hand gently. "Not how I hear it," Mrs. Porter replied. "Zoe says you stood your ground that day at the market. Didn't lose your temper, didn't back down. That matters." "Grandma worked as a nurse's aide for 40 years, Zoe explained. "Back when black medical professionals weren't welcome at the main hospital." Mrs. Porter nodded. "Cleaned floors in the same rooms where my granddaughter now treats patients. World changes, if you live long enough to see it." She pointed toward the wall where a black and white photograph hung, a picture of the original West Side Medical Clinic from the 1950s. "I worked there too, before it closed." Maya looked at the photograph with new interest. "Do you remember a Dr. Harrington who worked there?" The old woman's expression hardened slightly. "I remember. Not a kind man. His daughter turned out different though, didn't she? Sometimes the apple rolls far from the tree." As they talked, more people filtered into the room. The mayor was giving an impromptu tour to some business leaders. Eleanor was deep in conversation with Patricia Taylor about campaign strategy. Pastor David was organizing volunteers for the clinic's upcoming free screening day. Mrs. Porter watched it all with knowing eyes. "This is nice," she said. "But the real test comes when the cameras leave and the excitement fades. Will people still care 6 months from now? A year? 5 years?" "I will," Maya promised. "I believe you," the old woman said. "But lasting change isn't about heroes. It's about systems and everyday choices. It's about what happens when nobody's watching." Later that evening, after the guests had left and the cleaning crew had come and gone, Maya walked through the quiet clinic. Tomorrow the doors would open for actual patients, people who needed care, not ceremony. Her phone buzzed with a text from Eleanor. "Reporter called asking for a joint interview about our journey from conflict to collaboration. Thoughts?" Maya smiled and typed back, "Let's focus on the work instead." Less dramatic, but more important. Eleanor's response came quickly. "Agreed. See you at the task force meeting Thursday." Outside, the sun was setting over Millfield. From the clinic windows, Maya could see both sides of town. The historic east side with its Victorian homes and manicured parks, and the west side with its smaller houses and family-owned businesses. The dividing line between them seemed less sharp than it had 6 months ago. A car pulled into the parking lot, Layla bringing dinner as promised. Simple acts of friendship had become as important as the bigger policy changes. As Maya went to let her in, she thought about Mrs. Porter's words about lasting change. The incident at the farmer's market had indeed shocked the town, forcing people to see what had long been ignored. But the real story wasn't in that explosive moment. The real story was in what came after. The difficult conversations, the uncomfortable realizations, the small steps toward something better. It was in the clinic that would open tomorrow, the task force that would meet next week, the election coming up in November, and all the ordinary days that would follow. Change wasn't a single dramatic moment caught on video. It was the steady, unglamorous work of building something new, work that would continue long after the shock had faded, carried forward by people who cared enough to keep showing up, day after day. In Millfield, that work had only just begun.